The blistering August sun beat down on Zanna Montgomery's shoulders as she trudged the final mile toward Willow Creek. Her once fine dress was tattered and dusty, her boots worn through at the soles, and the few belongings she had left in the world were bundled in a small cloth sack. The year was 1878, and at 22 years of age, Zanna had never imagined she would find herself here alone, desperate, and so far from everything she had ever known. The small frontier town appeared on the horizon like a mirage, wooden buildings shimmering in the heat. Zanna quickened her pace despite her exhaustion. 3 days with barely any food or water had left her weak, but the sight of civilization sparked something in her hope, perhaps, or simply the primal instinct to survive. Willow Creek wasn't much to look at: a main street lined with hitching posts, a general store, saloon, and a handful of other establishments necessary for frontier life. But to Zanna, it represented possibility. She had come west following her father's death, the family farm in Tennessee seized by creditors, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and a dream of starting anew. As she entered the town, she became acutely aware of her appearance. Her chestnut hair had fallen loose from its pins, her face was smudged with dirt, and her blue calico dress was torn at the hem. Still, she held her chin high as she approached the general store, the first establishment she came to. An elderly man with spectacles perched on his nose looked up from behind the counter as the bell above the door announced her arrival. "Excuse me, sir," Zanna said, her voice cracking from thirst. "I was wondering if you might be hiring help." The storekeeper eyed her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. "Ain't hiring, miss. Times are tight." Zanna swallowed hard. "Please, I can clean, keep books, or tend to customers. I'm a hard worker." "Like I said, ain't hiring." His tone softened slightly. "Try the saloon. They sometimes need girls to serve drinks." The idea made Zanna's stomach turn, but she nodded politely and stepped back outside. The sun seemed even hotter now, and a wave of dizziness washed over her. She steadied herself against a post, then continued down the street. Door after door, her request was met with the same answer: no work to be had. By late afternoon, desperation had fully set in. Her hands trembled visibly as she approached the smithy at the edge of town. The rhythmic clanging of metal on metal echoed from the open-air structure, where a tall man worked at a forge. Zanna paused at the entrance, gathering what little courage she had left. The blacksmith hadn't noticed her yet, his back turned as he hammered a glowing piece of metal. He was broad-shouldered and strong, as most in his profession were, with dark hair dampened by sweat. "Excuse me," she called, her voice barely audible above the hammering. When he didn't respond, she stepped closer, her feet unsteady. "Sir, please." He turned suddenly, hammer raised mid-strike, and Zanna startled backward, losing her balance. The world tilted, darkness encroaching on the edges of her vision. The last thing she saw was the blacksmith dropping his tools and rushing toward her. When Zanna opened her eyes, she found herself lying on a narrow cot in what appeared to be the back room of the smithy. A cool cloth had been placed on her forehead, and a cup of water sat on a small table beside her. "You're awake," a deep voice observed. Turning her head, Zanna saw the blacksmith sitting on a stool nearby, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. His face was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jaw partially obscured by a short beard. His eyes, a startling shade of green, regarded her with concern. "I'm sorry," she began, attempting to sit up. "Easy now," he cautioned, reaching for the cup of water. "Drink this first." Zanna accepted the cup with trembling hands, sipping slowly as he'd instructed. "I'm Elias Wade," he introduced himself. "Town blacksmith." "Zanna Montgomery," she replied, her voice steadier now. "I apologize for the trouble, Mr. Wade. I haven't eaten in some time and the heat—" "No need to explain," Elias interrupted. "And it's just Elias. Mr. Wade was my father." Once she'd finished the water, Zanna made to stand. "I should be going. I didn't mean to impose." "Where exactly are you going?" he asked, his tone not unkind but direct. Zanna hesitated. The truth was, she had nowhere to go. Her meager savings had been spent on the journey west, and she hadn't secured lodging, counting on finding work immediately upon arrival. "I'll find something," she said with more confidence than she felt. "I was asking about work in town. Someone will need help eventually." Elias's expression turned skeptical. "You've tried every place already." Not the saloon," she admitted, color rising to her cheeks. He nodded, understanding her reluctance. "Wait here," he said, standing abruptly. "I'll be back." Before she could protest, he disappeared through a door that led to the main part of the smithy. Zanna heard muffled conversation Elias and another man before he returned a few minutes later with a small bundle. "My apprentice brought this from his mother's kitchen," Elias explained, unwrapping a cloth to reveal bread, cheese, and dried meat. "Eat. Then we can talk." Zanna's pride urged her to refuse, but her hunger won out. She ate slowly, savoring each bite, aware of Elias watching her from across the room where he'd resumed work at a small bench. Once she'd finished, she carefully folded the cloth and cleared her throat. "Thank you for your kindness, Elias. I can pay you back once I find work." He turned to face her, setting aside a horseshoe he'd been examining. "About that, what sort of work are you looking for?" "Anything honest," she replied quickly. "I can cook, clean, so. I kept the books for my father's farm and helped with the planting and harvest. I'm not afraid of hard work." "Your father's farm, where was that?" "Tennessee, near Nashville." The words caught in her throat. "He died 3 months ago. The bank took everything." Elias was silent for a moment, studying her. "So you came west?" "Yes, I thought." She trailed off, suddenly embarrassed by her naivety. "I thought there would be opportunities here." Another silence fell between them. Zanna stood, smoothing her tattered dress as best she could. "Thank you again for your help. If you hear of any work, I need someone," Elias said abruptly. Zanna stilled. "Pardon." "I need someone to help around the place. Cooking, cleaning, that sort of thing." He gestured vaguely. "I live above the smithy. It's not much, but there's a small room. Could be yours if you want the job." Hope bloomed in Zanna's chest, quickly followed by suspicion. She'd heard stories of young women being lured with promises of respectable work, only to find themselves in compromising positions. As if reading her thoughts, Elias added, "You'd have your own quarters. Lock on the door, and Mrs. Jenkins from the boarding house comes by twice a week to do laundry. You could meet her tomorrow. I'm offering honest work, Miss Montgomery, nothing more." Her hands shook as she considered his offer her only offer. I would be most grateful for the opportunity, Mr. Wade." "Elias." "But I can't accept charity." Elias rose from his bench, towering over her even from across the room. "You don't need to beg, Zanna. You need a home, and I need help. It's a fair exchange." The sincerity in his voice made her eyes sting with unshed tears. She blinked them back, unwilling to appear any weaker than she already had. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "How about now? I imagine you'd like to get cleaned up, and there's stew from yesterday that could be warmed for supper." For the first time in months, Zanna felt a weight lift from her shoulders. "Yes, I'd like that very much." Elias showed her upstairs to his living quarters, a modest but clean space with a kitchen, small sitting area, and 2 bedrooms separated by a narrow hallway. As promised, her room had a sturdy door with a lock. It contained a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a small window overlooking the back of the property, where a creek wound through cottonwood trees. "It's perfect," she said softly, running her hand over the simple quilt that covered the bed. "Bathroom's down the hall. There's soap and towels," Elias told her. "Take your time. I'll be downstairs finishing up for the day." Once alone, Zanna set down her small bundle of belongings and sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the sudden turn of events. She allowed herself a moment of relief before gathering herself. There would be time for reflection later. Right now, she had work to do. After washing away the grime of travel, Zanna changed into her spare dress, nearly as worn as the one she'd been wearing, but at least clean. She found the kitchen well stocked but disorganized, clear evidence of a bachelor's residence. The promised stew was in a pot on the stove, and she set about warming it while taking inventory of what else was available. By the time Elias came upstairs, Zanna had the table set, the stew hot, and a fresh loaf of bread she'd found wrapped in cloth sliced and ready. "You didn't have to do all this tonight," he said, looking surprised at the transformation of his kitchen. "It's what you hired me for, isn't it?" She replied with a small smile. "Please sit." They ate in companionable silence for a while, both hungrier than they'd realized. Zanna stole glances at her new employer, trying to get a measure of the man. He had a quietness about him that suggested thoughtfulness rather than aloofness. His hands, though calloused from his work, handled his utensils with unexpected grace. "How long have you been in Willow Creek?" she asked eventually. 5 years, Elias answered. "Came from St. Louis originally." And before that, he looked up, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "Boston. My father was a blacksmith there. I apprenticed with him until I was 18, then headed west." "That's quite a journey," says the woman who traveled from Tennessee alone. There was a note of admiration in his voice that made Zanna flush slightly. "Not by choice," she clarified. "After the farm was taken, there was nothing left for me there." Elias nodded, understanding in his eyes. "No family. My mother died when I was 12. No siblings. My father—" Zanna hesitated, the wound still fresh. "My father worked himself to death trying to keep the farm after several bad seasons. The debt was too much in the end." "I'm sorry," Elias said simply. "And you, any family?" A shadow crossed his face. "Not anymore. My parents are gone, had a brother but lost him in the war." The war between the states had ended 13 years ago, but its impact still resonated across the country. Zanna didn't press for details. "Well," she said instead, gathering their empty plates, "I think I'll wash these and then turn in if that's all right. It's been a long day." "Of course." Elias stood. "I usually start work at sunrise but take breakfast around 7. Don't feel you need to be up that early tomorrow, though. Rest as long as you need." "7 will be fine," Zanna assured him. "I'm accustomed to early mornings." He nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small pouch. "Almost forgot. Your first week's wages in advance, for anything you might need." Zanna stared at the pouch he held out. "That's not necessary. You've already given me food and shelter." "It's not charity, Zanna. It's payment for work you'll do." His voice was firm but gentle. "Take it." Hesitantly, she accepted the pouch, surprised by its weight. "Thank you." After Elias retired to his room, Zanna completed the washing up, then explored the kitchen more thoroughly, making mental notes of what supplies were needed. The pantry was decently stocked with staples: flour, sugar, coffee, and the like, but lacked fresh produce. Tomorrow, she decided, she would visit the general store to supplement their provisions. In her room, Zanna counted the money Elias had given her, far more than she'd expected for a week's domestic work. The generosity both touched and troubled her. She wasn't accustomed to accepting help, having been raised to be self-sufficient. But circumstances had forced her hand, and she was grateful for the opportunity Elias had provided. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, Zanna made a silent promise to herself. She would work harder than Elias expected. She would prove her worth. And someday, somehow, she would repay his kindness. The following weeks established a routine. Zanna rose early each morning to prepare breakfast before Elias began his day at the forge. She spent her days cleaning, cooking, and gradually organizing the living quarters that had clearly lacked a woman's touch for some time. 3 times a week, she ventured into town for supplies, slowly becoming acquainted with the residents of Willow Creek. Mrs. Jenkins, the laundress, proved to be a valuable source of information about the town and its inhabitants. A widow in her 60s with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, she took an immediate liking to Zanna. "About time that man hired some help," she declared during her first visit after Zanna's arrival. "Been telling him for years he needs someone to look after things proper like." "He seems capable enough," Zanna observed, helping Mrs. Jenkins fold the clean linens. "Oh, capable, sure. Elias Wade is one of the most capable men I've ever known, but he works too hard, keeps to himself too much." The older woman gave Zanna a sidelong glance. "Been that way since he lost his wife." Zanna's hands stilled on the sheet she was folding. "His wife? He didn't mention being married." Would he? Still pains him, I expect." Mrs. Jenkins lowered her voice, though they were alone in the house. Emma was her name. Pretty little thing from back east. They weren't married but a year when the influenza took her. That was 4 years ago now. The revelation cast Elias in a new light for Zanna. His solitary nature, the sparse decoration of the home, it made more sense now. She found herself watching him more closely after that, noticing the moments when his gaze would become distant, as if seeing something or someone no longer there. For his part, Elias seemed pleased with Zanna's work, though he said little about it directly. His approval showed in other ways, bringing home fresh fruit from a traveling vendor, or a length of bright fabric he thought might be useful somehow. Once, he returned from the smithy with a small wooden box he'd commissioned from the carpenter. "For your things," he said simply, handing it to her. Zanna opened it to find a beautifully crafted jewelry box with a tiny key. "It's lovely, but I don't have any jewelry," she admitted. Elias shrugged. Everyone should have a place for special things. The gesture touched her deeply. That night she placed the pressed flower from her father's funeral, her only keepsake from home, inside the box. As summer faded into autumn, Zanna found herself settling into life in Willow Creek. The town was small but growing, situated as it was along a route frequented by cattle drives and travelers heading further west. Elias's smithy did steady business, and Zanna gradually took on more responsibilities, including keeping his books in order. It was while reviewing his ledger one evening in early October that Zanna noticed a discrepancy. Elias had been paying her considerably more than what she'd seen other domestic workers in town receive. When she brought it to his attention after supper, he seemed unconcerned. "You do more than just domestic work. You're managing the books now, too." "Even so, it's too much," she insisted. "I'm already receiving room and board." Elias set down his coffee cup with deliberate care. "Do you feel you're not earning your keep?" "No, that's not it." Then let me worry about what I pay you." His tone was final but not unkind. "You're worth every penny, Zanna." The warmth in his eyes as he said her name sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She quickly looked down at the ledger, hoping he hadn't noticed her reaction. "At least let me use some of it to buy supplies for the house," she negotiated. "The curtains in the sitting room are beyond repair, and winter's coming. We could use some heavier blankets." A small smile played at the corners of Elias's mouth. "Seems reasonable." The next day, Zanna visited the general store with a list of household necessities. Mr. Peterson, the shopkeeper who had turned her away on her first day in town, now greeted her warmly. "Miss Montgomery, what can I help you with today?" As she selected fabric for curtains, Zanna reflected on how quickly her circumstances had changed. In just a few months, she had gone from desperate outsider to respected member of the community, all because one man had seen value in her when others hadn't. While examining a bolt of heavy wool, Zanna overheard a conversation between Mr. Peterson and another customer. "Heard the Dawson gang was spotted near Miller's Crossing," the man was saying. "Sheriff in Henderson says they've hit 3 towns in the last month." "Lord help us if they come this way," Peterson replied. "That gang doesn't leave witnesses." Zanna's blood ran cold. She'd read about the Dawson gang in a newspaper. Elias had brought home a ruthless band of outlaws who specialized in robbing small frontier towns, led by a man named Frank Dawson, who was rumored to have killed a dozen men. That evening she mentioned what she'd heard to Elias as they sat by the fire after supper. "Folks always talk," he said dismissively. "Odds are they're nowhere near here. But what if they do come?" Zanna pressed. "Willow Creek doesn't even have a sheriff." "We have men who can handle trouble if it comes." Elias picked up a poker and adjusted a log in the fireplace. "Don't worry yourself about it." But Zanna did worry, especially when Elias was late returning from delivering a repaired plow to a farm outside town a few days later. She paced the floor until she heard his wagon, then rushed to the window to confirm it was him. When he entered, she was waiting with hands on hips. "You're 3 hours late." Elias raised an eyebrow at her tone. "Didn't realize I had a curfew." "I was worried," she admitted, her anger deflating. With talk of the Dawson gang, the Hendersons' youngest took ill suddenly. "I stayed to help bring the doctor." He removed his coat, hanging it by the door. "I would have sent word if I'd known you'd be concerned." Zanna felt foolish for her outburst. "I'm sorry." "I shouldn't have assumed. No need to apologize." Elias's expression softened. "It's nice having someone care if I come home or not." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meaning neither was ready to acknowledge. Zanna busied herself with warming his dinner, while Elias washed up at the basin by the door. They ate together as usual, but something had shifted, a new awareness of each other that made the small table seem suddenly intimate. Zanna found herself noticing details she'd overlooked before. The way Elias's hair curled slightly at his collar, the small scar above his right eyebrow, how his hands dwarfed the coffee cup he held. "The Harvest Festival is next week," Elias mentioned as they cleared the table. "I usually close the smithy for the day. Thought you might like to attend." Zanna had heard about the festival from Mrs. Jenkins, an annual celebration with music, dancing, and a community meal to mark the end of harvest season. "I'd enjoy that," she replied, trying to sound casual despite the pleasure his invitation brought. "Mrs. Jenkins said everyone in town attends." "Just about." Elias hesitated, then added, "Might be nice to have a new dress for the occasion, if you'd like." Zanna glanced down at her garments, the same 2 dresses she'd arrived with, though she'd mended them as best she could. "I suppose I could use something new." The next day, Zanna visited the dressmaker's shop for the first time. Mrs. Holloway, a plump woman with nimble fingers and a ready smile, helped her select a pattern and fabric for a dress that could be completed in time for the festival. "Blue suits you," Mrs. Holloway observed as she pinned the fabric around Zanna. "Brings out the gold in your eyes. I'm sure Mr. Wade will approve." Zanna felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Mr. Wade is my employer, nothing more." The dressmaker gave her a knowing look but said nothing further on the subject. The completed dress was delivered 3 days before the festival, a lovely creation of deep blue cotton with white lace trim at the collar and cuffs. Zanna tried it on immediately, marveling at the way it fit perfectly and how different she looked in something new and well-made. On the day of the festival, Zanna spent extra time on her appearance, arranging her hair in a style she hadn't attempted since leaving Tennessee. When she emerged from her room, Elias was waiting in the sitting area, dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and clean-shaven for the occasion. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her. "You look very nice." "Thank you," Zanna replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "As do you." The town square had been transformed for the festival, with tables laden with food, colorful bunting strung between buildings, and a cleared area for dancing where a small band of local musicians played lively tunes. Lanterns hung from wires overhead, ready to illuminate the celebration once the sun set. As they approached, Zanna was struck by how integrated she felt in the community. Townspeople called greetings to them both, and Mrs. Jenkins waved them over to where she sat with several other women. "Don't you two make a handsome pair?" she declared loudly enough for nearby people to hear. Elias cleared his throat. "Zanna, would you like something to drink? I see they've set up the cider barrel." "Yes, thank you," she replied, grateful for his intervention. As Elias walked away, Mrs. Jenkins patted the seat beside her. "Come, sit. Tell me how you're finding life with our blacksmith." "He's a fair employer," Zanna said carefully. "Just an employer, is he?" Mrs. Jenkins raised an eyebrow. "Not what it looks like from where I'm sitting." Before Zanna could respond, another woman leaned in. "Elias Wade hasn't attended a social function with anyone since his wife passed. Not for lack of offers, mind you. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him." The conversation was mercifully interrupted by Elias's return with 2 cups of cider. He handed one to Zanna, then addressed Mrs. Jenkins. "You're looking well, madam. New bonnet." The evening progressed pleasantly. They shared a meal at the community tables, sampled various desserts contributed by town families, and listened to speeches from prominent citizens celebrating the year's blessings. As darkness fell, the lanterns were lit, casting a warm glow over the festivities. The band struck up a waltz and couples began moving to the dance area. Zanna watched, tapping her foot in time to the music. "Would you care to dance?" Elias's voice was low near her ear. She turned to find him standing beside her, hand extended. "I'd like that very much." His hand was warm and solid as he led her to the dance floor. When he placed his other hand at her waist, Zanna felt a jolt of awareness course through her. She'd never stood this close to him before. "I should warn you," she said as they began to move with the music. "It's been some time since I've danced." "You're doing fine," Elias assured her, guiding her smoothly around the floor. Zanna gradually relaxed into his lead, allowing herself to enjoy the moment. In the lantern light, with music swirling around them, it was easy to forget the circumstances that had brought them together, that she was his employee, dependent on his goodwill. As if reading her thoughts, Elias said quietly, "I'm glad you came to Willow Creek, Zanna." She looked up at him, struck by the sincerity in his eyes. "Even though I fainted in your smithy," his lips curved in a rare, full smile. "Especially because of that. Otherwise, I might never have gotten up the nerve to speak to you." "You?" Zanna couldn't hide her surprise. "I can't imagine you being nervous about anything. Then you don't know me as well as I thought." His hand tightened slightly at her waist. "There are many things that frighten me, Zanna." The way he said her name with a softness reserved only for her made Zanna's heart beat faster. She was about to ask what he meant when a commotion at the edge of the square interrupted the festivities. 5 men on horseback had ridden into town, their approach muffled by the music and celebration. They now sat at the periphery of the festival, watching the townsfolk with predatory interest. Each man wore a bandana pulled up to just below his eyes, and all had pistols visible at their hips. The music faltered as people became aware of the newcomers. Elias's posture changed instantly, his body tensing as he maneuvered Zanna behind him. One of the riders, a tall man with cold blue eyes visible above his bandana, urged his horse forward. "Evening, folks. Don't mean to interrupt your little party." The town mayor, a portly man named Harrison, stepped forward. "What can we do for you gentlemen?" "Just passing through," the leader said, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Thought we might join your celebration. Been riding a long way." Murmurs rippled through the gathered townspeople. Everyone knew who these men were, though no one dared say it aloud. "Of course," Mayor Harrison replied, his voice strained. "There's plenty of food. You're welcome to some refreshment before you continue your journey." The leader dismounted smoothly, followed by his companions. As they approached the tables, people moved aside, creating a wide berth around them. "Zanna," Elias whispered urgently, "I want you to go back to the smithy. Lock the door behind you." "I'm not leaving you," she replied, gripping his arm. "Please." His eyes held a desperation she'd never seen before. "I need to know you're safe." Before she could argue further, the leader of the gang spotted them and changed direction, heading straight for where they stood. "Well now, who do we have here?" His gaze fixed on Zanna, traveling over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Aren't you a pretty one?" Elias shifted, keeping himself between Zanna and the outlaw. "Evening," he said curtly. "You two sweethearts?" the man asked, his eyes never leaving Zanna. "Or is she available for other company?" "She's my wife," Elias said firmly. The lie surprised Zanna, but she didn't contradict him, understanding its purpose. The outlaw's eyes narrowed. "Lucky man." He turned his attention to Elias. "And who might you be?" "Elias Wade, town blacksmith." "Blacksmith, huh?" The man seemed to consider this information. "Good profession." "Essential." He extended his hand. "Frank Dawson." A chill ran through Zanna at the confirmation of what they'd all suspected. Elias shook Dawson's hand briefly, his expression unreadable. "My men and I will be staying in town tonight," Dawson announced, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Just one night. We'll be on our way in the morning. I trust the hotel has vacancies." "Yes, sir," the hotel owner confirmed from the crowd. "We can accommodate you." "Excellent." Dawson's eyes swept the square. "Please continue your festivities, don't mind us." The band hesitantly resumed playing, though the mood of celebration had vanished. People spoke in hushed tones. Parents gathered their children, and many began making excuses to leave. "We should go," Elias murmured to Zanna. She nodded, allowing him to guide her away from the square. They walked in tense silence back to the smithy, Elias's hand at the small of her back, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Once inside, with the door locked behind them, Elias immediately moved to check the windows, ensuring they were secured. "You think they'll cause trouble?" Zanna asked, lighting a lamp. "I don't know." Elias ran a hand through his hair, his earlier composure slipping. "The Dawson gang doesn't usually announce themselves like that. They typically hit hard and fast, then disappear. Perhaps they're just passing through like they said. Perhaps." But his tone suggested he didn't believe it. Zanna began to unpin her hair, the weight of it giving her a headache. "You told him I was your wife." Elias glanced at her, then away. "I'm sorry for that. It seemed the safest option. Dawson's reputation with women is not good." "You don't need to apologize. I understand." She hesitated, then added, "Thank you for protecting me." He nodded once, still distracted by his thoughts. "I'm going to check the back door, make sure it's secure." Left alone, Zanna changed out of her festival dress, folding it carefully before putting on her nightgown and robe. She was brushing out her hair when Elias knocked softly on her door. "May I come in?" "Yes," she called, setting down her brush. Elias entered, still fully dressed but with his collar loosened. He carried a small revolver which he held out to her. "You know how to use this," Zanna nodded, taking it carefully. "My father taught me, but Elias, do you really think—" "I hope not," he interrupted. "But I'd rest easier knowing you have it." He showed her that it was loaded. "Keep it under your pillow tonight. What about you? I have another." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Lock this behind me. Don't open it unless you hear my voice." After he left, Zanna did as instructed, then sat on the edge of her bed, the revolver beside her. The evening that had begun so pleasantly had taken a dark turn, and she found herself reliving the moment when Frank Dawson's cold eyes had assessed her like property. Sleep eluded her for hours. She lay awake, listening to the occasional sounds from the street below, horses passing, voices raised in drunken song as the saloon emptied in the early hours. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her, and she drifted into an uneasy slumber. A crash jolted her awake. For a moment, Zanna was disoriented, unsure what had woken her. Then she heard raised voices from the main room, Elias and someone else. Grabbing the revolver, she crept to her door, pressing her ear against it. "No, you have a safe, blacksmith. Open it." The voice was unfamiliar, harsh. "There's nothing worth taking," Elias replied, his tone level but tense. "Let me be the judge of that." Zanna's heart pounded. One of Dawson's men had broken in. She considered her options. She could stay hidden and hope the intruder left, or she could try to help Elias. The decision was made for her when she heard a thud, followed by Elias's grunt of pain. Without hesitation, Zanna unlocked her door and stepped into the hallway, the revolver held steady in both hands. The scene in the main room froze her momentarily. Elias was on his knees, blood trickling from a cut above his eye, while a bearded man stood over him with a pistol. "Step away from him," Zanna commanded, her voice remarkably calm despite her terror. The intruder spun toward her, his pistol swinging in her direction. "Well, look who's awake, the little wife." "Zanna, go back," Elias began, but was silenced by a kick to his ribs. "I said step away," Zanna repeated, cocking the hammer of her revolver. The man smirked. "You won't shoot me, sweetheart. Women don't have the stomach for it." "My father didn't raise me to bluff," she replied. "Last chance." Something in her eyes must have convinced him she was serious because his smirk faltered. All right, just take it easy with that thing." He lowered his gun slightly, but in the next instant lunged toward her. Zanna fired without hesitation, the sound deafening in the confined space. The man staggered, clutching his shoulder, but kept coming. Elias surged to his feet, tackling him from behind. The two men crashed into the table, sending it toppling. Zanna circled, trying to get a clear shot, but they were grappling too closely. The intruder's gun had skittered across the floor in the struggle, but he'd pulled a knife from his boot and was trying to bring it to bear against Elias. Zanna spotted a cast iron skillet on the stove and grabbed it, hefting its substantial weight. When an opening presented itself, she swung with all her might, connecting with the back of the intruder's head. He collapsed instantly, unconscious. Elias rolled away, breathing heavily. "Are you hurt?" he asked, climbing to his feet. "No, I'm fine," Zanna assured him, though she was trembling with reaction. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing." He retrieved a length of rope from a drawer and quickly bound the unconscious man's hands and feet. "We need to alert the others. Dawson won't be far behind when his man doesn't return." As if summoned by his name, a voice called from outside. "Jenkins, what's taking so long?" Elias and Zanna exchanged alarmed glances. He motioned for her to stay back, then moved to the window, peering carefully around the edge of the curtain. "Dawson and 3 others," he whispered. "They're coming this way." The situation was dire. They were outnumbered and outgunned, with little hope of assistance. The nearest lawman was in Henderson, a day's ride away. "The back door," Zanna suggested. "We could slip out, try to reach the church. Ring the bell to wake the town." Elias nodded. "Get dressed quickly. We have minutes at most." Zanna hurried to her room, throwing on her clothes and stuffing a few essential items into her pockets. When she returned, Elias had dragged the unconscious outlaw into a closet and was checking his own revolver. "Ready?" he asked. A pounding at the front door made them both start. "Wade." "Open up." Dawson's voice carried clearly through the wood. "My man's in there and I want him back." Elias took Zanna's hand, leading her silently toward the back of the apartment. They descended the narrow staircase that led directly to the rear of the smithy, emerging into the cool night air. The moon was nearly full, casting enough light to see by as they crept along the back of the building. They had almost reached the corner when a figure stepped into their path. Going somewhere. It was one of Dawson's men, a lean, scarred individual with a shotgun aimed at Elias's chest. Elias pushed Zanna behind him. "We don't want trouble, let us pass." "Can't do that." The outlaw jerked his head toward the front of the smithy. "Boss wants a word with you." With no choice, they were marched around to the front, where Dawson and his remaining men waited. The leader's cold eyes registered no surprise at seeing them. "Thought you might try the back way," he said conversationally. "Predictable but smart. Unfortunately for you, I'm smarter." His gaze shifted to Zanna. "Where's Jenkins?" "Indisposed," Elias answered before she could speak. Dawson's expression hardened. "Inside. Now." Once back in the apartment with Dawson's men positioning themselves at exits, the outlaw leader surveyed the overturned furniture and signs of struggle with apparent amusement. "Seems Jenkins underestimated you." He focused on Zanna. "Or perhaps he underestimated the missus. Was it you who shot him, my dear?" Zanna lifted her chin but remained silent. "No matter." Dawson waved dismissively. "I came to Willow Creek for a specific purpose, and you're going to help me achieve it." "We don't have anything worth stealing," Elias stated flatly. "Oh, I disagree." Dawson settled himself in one of the few upright chairs. "You see, I have information that a certain strongbox is passing through town tomorrow, payroll for the railroad construction further west. A considerable sum. And it's being entrusted to the town blacksmith for safekeeping overnight." Zanna glanced at Elias, whose expression had gone carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said evenly. "Come now, Wade, let's not play games." Dawson leaned forward. "The strongbox arrives on tomorrow's stage. You're to hold it in your safe until the railroad agent collects it the following morning. This arrangement was made weeks ago." Elias shook his head. "You've been misinformed." "Have I?" Dawson stood, moving to stand directly in front of Elias. "Are you willing to bet your wife's life on that?" The threat hung in the air, unmistakable. Zanna felt cold fear slide down her spine, but she kept her expression neutral, unwilling to give Dawson the satisfaction of seeing her afraid. "Leave her out of this," Elias said, his voice low and dangerous. "I'd be happy to," Dawson replied smoothly. "Just confirm what I already know and we'll wait comfortably for the stage to arrive. No one needs to get hurt." Elias remained silent, his jaw clenched. "Or," Dawson continued, "I can have my men entertain themselves with your lovely wife while we wait. Your choice." Zanna saw the moment Elias broke. A muscle twitched in his cheek and his hands, which had been loose at his sides, curled into fists. "Yes," he admitted reluctantly. "The payroll is coming on tomorrow's stage." Dawson smiled, satisfied. "See, honesty isn't so difficult." He turned to his men. Miller, get Jenkins out of wherever they stashed him. Thompson, secure the lady. Barnes, keep watch downstairs. The next hours were a nightmare of tension. Dawn broke with Zanna and Elias seated back-to-back on the floor, hands bound, while Dawson's men took turns standing guard. Jenkins had been revived and was nursing his wounded shoulder, glaring hatefully at Zanna whenever their eyes met. Dawson himself seemed unnervingly patient, content to wait for the stage's arrival. He'd searched the apartment thoroughly, locating Elias's safe behind a painting but making no attempt to open it yet. "How did you know about the payroll?" Elias asked during a lull in the tense silence. "Information is a valuable commodity," Dawson replied cryptically. "The right words in the right ears can yield all sorts of interesting facts." "Someone in town told you," Zanna realized aloud. Dawson's eyes flickered to her, amused. "Smart as well as pretty." "Yes, my dear. Someone in your charming community has been very helpful. For a price, of course." The revelation was a bitter one. Someone they possibly knew and trusted had betrayed the town to these outlaws. Around mid-morning, the sound of an approaching stagecoach echoed from the street below. Dawson straightened, checking his pocket watch. "Right on time," he noted with satisfaction. "Miller, Thompson, positions." The two men moved to the windows, guns ready. Dawson turned to Elias and Zanna. "Now comes the delicate part. Wade, you're going to greet the driver, accept the strongbox, and bring it upstairs without arousing suspicion. If you try anything at all, Thompson will put a bullet in your wife's pretty head." "Understood," Elias nodded stiffly. Dawson cut his bonds, then grabbed Zanna's hair, yanking her head back to place his knife against her throat. "Remember what's at stake." As Elias descended to meet the stage, Zanna fought to control her breathing. The cold steel against her skin was terrifying, but more frightening was the realization that once Dawson had what he wanted, he and his men would likely kill them both to eliminate witnesses. Minutes later, Elias returned carrying a heavy iron box. His eyes immediately sought Zanna's, relief crossing his features when he saw she was unharmed. "Set it down and open the safe," Dawson instructed, keeping the knife at Zanna's throat. Elias complied, turning the dial of the wall safe with practiced movements. The door swung open, revealing a small interior space. "The box won't fit in there," Elias pointed out. "No matter, we'll transfer the contents." Dawson nodded toward the strongbox. "Open it." "I can't. I don't have the key." Dawson's grip on Zanna's hair tightened painfully. "Don't lie to me, Wade." "I'm not lying," Elias insisted. "The railroad agent has the only key. I'm just supposed to keep it secure overnight." Frustration flashed across Dawson's face. "Jenkins, check his pockets." The wounded outlaw searched Elias roughly, finding nothing. "He's telling the truth, boss. No key." Dawson considered his options. "Miller, get the tools from downstairs. We'll break it open." While Miller was gone, Barnes called up from his position at the front of the smithy. "Riders coming. Looks like 3 men," Dawson cursed under his breath. "Who are they?" "Can't tell yet. Coming fast, though." "Thompson, help Barnes. Don't let anyone in." Dawson turned to Elias. "Friends of yours, could be customers," Elias replied neutrally. "The smithy should be open by now." The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped outside. Voices carried faintly from below, followed by Barnes's gruff response. Then, without warning, gunshots erupted. Dawson dragged Zanna to her feet, using her as a shield while keeping the knife at her throat. "What did you do?" he demanded of Elias. "Nothing," Elias answered truthfully. "I didn't signal anyone." More gunfire echoed from downstairs, along with shouts and the sound of breaking glass. Miller returned from the back stairs, his face tense. "Someone's out back too," he reported. "We're surrounded." "How many?" Dawson snapped. "Can't tell, at least 5 or 6. A voice called up from below. "Dawson, we know you're in there. Release your hostages and surrender." Dawson's face contorted with rage. "Wade, you're coming with us. The woman too." He began backing toward the rear stairs, dragging Zanna with him. "Miller, bring him." Jenkins, grab the strong box. The wounded outlaw struggled to lift the heavy box. "Boss, I can't. My shoulder." "Leave it," Dawson ordered impatiently. "We need to move." As they reached the back staircase, a shot rang out from below, followed by a cry of pain. Miller cursed. "They've got the back exit covered too." Trapped with options dwindling rapidly, Dawson's cold composure finally cracked. "Wade," he shouted. "Tell them to back off or I'll cut her throat." Elias stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. "Let her go, Dawson. She's not part of this." "She became part of this the moment you lied about her being your wife," Dawson hissed. "I know who she is, just some drifter you took in. No one would miss her." The casual cruelty of the statement hit Zanna like a physical blow. Was that how the world saw her? As someone no one would miss? But when she looked at Elias, she saw something in his eyes that contradicted Dawson's assessment of fierce protectiveness, yes, but something deeper too. Something that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "I would miss her," Elias said quietly. "More than you could possibly understand." The raw emotion in his voice momentarily disarmed Dawson, his knife hand slackening just enough for Zanna to act. Using a move her father had taught her long ago, she drove her elbow hard into Dawson's ribs while simultaneously stamping on his instep. The outlaw grunted in pain, his grip loosening. Zanna wrenched herself away, stumbling toward Elias, who caught her by the shoulders. Miller raised his gun, but Elias was faster, drawing a small derringer from his boot and firing in one fluid motion. The outlaw dropped with a cry, clutching his leg. Jenkins made a move toward them, but the sudden crash of the front door being forced open distracted him. Men poured into the apartment, not lawmen, Zanna realized, but townspeople. Mr. Peterson from the general store, the blacksmith's apprentice, the livery owner, and others, all armed and determined. Dawson, seeing his plan unraveling, made a desperate lunge for the strongbox, as if its contents were worth dying for. He never reached it. A shot rang out and he fell, a red stain spreading across his chest. In the chaos that followed, Zanna found herself being hustled into her room by Elias, away from the violence. Once the door closed behind them, he immediately began untying her hands, his fingers gentle despite their urgency. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice thick with concern. "No," she assured him, though her throat burned where Dawson's knife had pressed. I'm fine." The bonds fell away and Elias took her hands in his, examining her wrists where the rope had chafed. "I'm so sorry, Zanna. This is my fault." "How could it possibly be your fault? I knew about the payroll. I should have realized it could attract trouble." His eyes, usually so steady, were haunted. "When he threatened you, you did what you had to do," she interrupted softly. "As did I." Elias's hands tightened around hers. "When he said no one would miss you, that's not true. I would. I do, even when you're just in the next room." The admission hung between them, fraught with meaning. Zanna felt something shift in her chest, a recognition of what had been growing between them for months. "Elias," she began, but a knock at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. Mayor Harrison's voice called, "Wade, is Miss Montgomery all right?" Elias released her hands reluctantly. "We'll talk later," he promised, then raised his voice. "We're coming out." The aftermath of the confrontation with the Dawson gang was chaotic, but ultimately brought the community of Willow Creek closer together. Two of the outlaws had been killed, Dawson and Thompson, while Jenkins and Miller were taken to Henderson to stand trial. Barnes had escaped during the initial assault, but was captured the following day by a posse from a neighboring town. The identity of Dawson's informant within Willow Creek was discovered to be a drifter who had been working at the livery for just a few weeks. He had overheard a conversation between the stagecoach driver and the station manager about the payroll delivery, and sold the information to Dawson for a promised cut of the takings. Through it all, Zanna found herself surrounded by people who contradicted Dawson's cruel assessment that no one would miss her. The townspeople, who had once regarded her with suspicion, now treated her with warmth and respect. Mrs. Jenkins insisted on staying with her for several days after the incident, fussing over her like a mother hen. Mr. Peterson refused payment when she visited the general store, saying her bravery had saved the town from disaster. But most significant was the change in her relationship with Elias. The promised conversation had been delayed by the necessary dealings with authorities and the restoration of their damaged home, but Zanna felt the difference in his every look, every casual touch. Something profound had been acknowledged between them, even if not yet spoken aloud. 2 weeks after the Dawson incident, with life in Willow Creek returning to normal, Elias closed the smithy early and asked Zanna to accompany him on a ride. Curious, she agreed, and they set out on horseback, following the creek that gave the town its name. After riding for about an hour, they came to a beautiful clearing where cottonwood trees created a natural canopy beside the water. Elias had clearly planned ahead. A blanket was spread on the ground, and he produced a small picnic from his saddlebag. "This is lovely," Zanna commented as they sat by the creek. "How did you find this place?" "I come here sometimes to think," Elias replied, handing her a plate. "It's peaceful." They ate in companionable silence for a while, listening to the water and the birds overhead. When they had finished, Elias seemed to gather himself, turning to face her directly. "Zanna, there's something I need to say." His voice was steady, but she could see tension in the set of his shoulders. "When Dawson had that knife to your throat, I realized something I think I've known for months but was afraid to acknowledge." Her heart began to beat faster. "What's that?" "That I care for you, not as an employee or even just a friend." His green eyes held hers intently. "I think I started falling in love with you the day you appeared at my smithy, asking for work with your hands shaking but your chin held high." The confession, spoken so plainly, brought tears to Zanna's eyes. "Elias, please, let me finish." He took her hands in his, a gesture that had become familiar between them. "I know I'm not offering you much. The smithy does well enough, but it's a simple life. And I know I'm older than you, with a past that sometimes still haunts me. But if you could consider—" "Yes," Zanna interrupted, unable to contain herself any longer. Elias blinked in surprise. "Yes, but I haven't asked anything yet." "Whatever you're about to ask, the answer is yes." She squeezed his hands. "I love you too, Elias. I think I have almost from the beginning, though I tried to tell myself it was just gratitude." "And now," he asked, hope blooming in his expression, "now I know better." Zanna moved closer, bringing one hand up to touch his face. "It's not gratitude that makes my heart race when you enter a room, or that has me watching the clock until you come home each day. It's love, pure and simple." Elias's smile transformed his usually serious face. "In that case, Zanna Montgomery, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? For real this time, not just as a ruse to fool outlaws." Laughter bubbled up from Zanna's chest, bright and joyful. "Yes, Elias Wade, I would like nothing better." He leaned forward, closing the distance between them, and kissed her gently at first, then with growing passion as she responded eagerly. When they finally parted, both breathless, Elias rested his forehead against hers. "When you came to Willow Creek," he murmured, "you said you were looking for a new beginning. I hope this is it." "It is," Zanna assured him, "though not in any way I could have imagined." The wedding took place in early December with the entire town in attendance. Mrs. Jenkins insisted on hosting the reception at the boarding house, while Mrs. Holloway created a wedding dress that made Zanna feel like a princess. Mayor Harrison performed the ceremony in the small church, beaming as if he personally had arranged the match. As Zanna stood beside Elias, reciting vows that would bind them together for life, she reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her family farm, which had seemed like the end of everything, had ultimately led her to Willow Creek and to Elias. Her desperate plea for work, hands shaking with hunger and fear, had been answered not just with employment but with a home and a heart to call her own. The winter months passed in newlywed bliss. Zanna and Elias settled into married life with remarkable ease, their previous arrangement as employer and employee having already established many of their daily patterns. The difference now was the shared bed, the freedom to express their love openly, and the plans they made for their future together. One such plan came to fruition in early spring, when Elias purchased land on the outskirts of town, 20 acres with good water access and fertile soil. Though he had no intention of giving up his blacksmithing, the land would allow them to build a proper home and perhaps raise a few horses, something Elias had always wanted to do. "It's not as large as your father's farm," he told Zanna as they walked the property one sunny March morning, "but I thought you might like having land again." Zanna, deeply touched by his thoughtfulness, squeezed his hand. "It's perfect, Elias, more than I ever expected to have again." Construction on their new home began immediately, with many townspeople pitching in to help. By summer, the modest but comfortable house was completed, featuring a wide porch where Zanna could sit in the evenings to watch the sunset while Elias smoked his pipe beside her. Life settled into a pleasant rhythm. Elias continued his work at the smithy, while Zanna divided her time between helping him with the books, tending their small but growing farm, and occasionally assisting Mrs. Holloway at the dressmaker's shop, where she had discovered a talent for design. In the fall, nearly a year after the Dawson incident, Zanna confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks: she was expecting their first child. When she shared the news with Elias, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. Joy transformed his features, and he lifted her in his arms, spinning her around their kitchen before setting her down gently, suddenly concerned about her condition. "Are you feeling well? Do you need to rest? I can fetch the doctor," Zanna laughed, placing her hands on his chest to calm him. "I'm perfectly fine, Elias. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," he replied, his hands gentle on her waist. "Not carrying my child." The wonder in his voice made Zanna fall in love with him all over again. The news spread quickly through Willow Creek, and once again Zanna found herself surrounded by support. Mrs. Jenkins appointed herself unofficial midwife, visiting regularly with advice and herbal remedies for morning sickness. Other women in town contributed baby clothes and blankets, while Elias threw himself into crafting a cradle, working on it in the evenings with meticulous care. As Zanna's body changed with the growing life inside her, she often reflected on how far she had come from that desperate day when she'd arrived in Willow Creek. The hands that had once shaken with hunger and fear now moved confidently through her daily tasks, secure in the knowledge that she was exactly where she was meant to be. On a warm May evening in 1880, after a labor that lasted through the night, Zanna gave birth to a healthy baby girl. Elias, who had paced the hallway for hours, was finally allowed into the bedroom where Mrs. Jenkins and the doctor had attended to his wife. The sight that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Zanna, tired but radiant, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. She looked up as he entered, her smile brighter than he'd ever seen it. "Come meet your daughter," she invited softly. Elias approached the bed with reverence, sitting carefully beside Zanna as she tilted the bundle to reveal a perfect little face with a dusting of dark hair. "She's beautiful," he whispered, reaching out a hesitant finger to touch the baby's cheek. "Just like her mother. Would you like to hold her?" The request clearly terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. With exaggerated care, Elias accepted the tiny bundle, cradling his daughter as if she were made of the most delicate glass. "What shall we name her?" Zanna asked. Watching the two people she loved most in the world, Elias considered for a moment. "What about Emma?" The suggestion caught Zanna by surprise. Elias rarely spoke of his first wife, the pain of her loss still evident whenever her name was mentioned. That he would suggest naming their daughter after her was both unexpected and deeply moving. "Are you sure?" she asked gently. "I am," he confirmed. "Emma would have liked you, I think. She always said I needed someone strong enough to match my stubbornness." A small smile played at his lips. "You've proven her right." Zanna reached out to touch his arm. "Then Emma it is. Emma Montgomery Wade." As if approving her name, the baby made a small sound, her tiny fingers curling around Elias's much larger one. The look of wonder on his face was something Zanna knew she would remember forever. The years that followed brought more blessings than Zanna could have imagined on that desperate day when she'd first arrived in Willow Creek. Emma was joined by a brother, Jacob, 2 years later, and then by another sister, Sarah, 3 years after that. The home that Elias had built for them expanded to accommodate their growing family, and the land around it flourished under their care. Elias continued his work as a blacksmith, but as Willow Creek grew, so did his business. He took on multiple apprentices, eventually opening a larger shop that specialized not just in practical items like horseshoes and tools, but also in decorative metalwork that was shipped to larger cities. His reputation for quality craftsmanship spread throughout the territory. Zanna, for her part, found her own calling. What had begun as occasional assistance to Mrs. Holloway evolved into a partnership when the older woman decided to retire. The dressmaking shop, renamed Montgomery Designs, became known for its elegant yet practical fashions that combined Eastern sophistication with Western practicality. Through it all, their love remained the foundation of everything they built together. The hardships they had faced, Zanna's desperate arrival in town, the terrifying encounter with the Dawson gang had forged a bond between them that only strengthened with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Elias surprised Zanna with a gift, a small wooden box, exquisitely crafted, with her initials inlaid in silver on the lid. "To replace the one that was lost," he explained, referring to the jewelry box that had been damaged during the Dawson incident. When Zanna opened it, she found a delicate gold locket inside. The front was engraved with a willow tree, its branches swaying as if in a gentle breeze. Inside were 2 miniature portraits, one of Elias, the other of their 3 children grouped together. "It's beautiful," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll treasure it always." Elias clasped it around her neck, his fingers lingering on her skin. "I wanted you to have something to remind you of home, no matter where you are." "Home isn't a place, Elias," Zanna replied, turning to face him. "It's you, it's always been you." He smiled, the same smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "Do you ever think about that first day when you came to the smithy?" "Often," she admitted. "I was so desperate, so afraid. But even then, something about you made me feel safe. You know what I remember most?" Elias pulled her closer. "How brave you were. Hands shaking, exhausted, hungry, but still standing tall, refusing to be pitied. And And you said I didn't need to beg, I needed a home. Zanna rested her head against his chest, hearing the steady beat of his heart. You gave me that and so much more. We gave it to each other, Elias corrected gently. Everything I am. Everything we've built, it began with you walking into my smithy that day. As they stood together in the home they had created, surrounded by the evidence of their shared life, children's toys scattered on the floor, Zanna's sewing basket beside Elias's, pipe on the table, photographs of their family on the walls, Zanna reflected on the journey that had brought them here. From desperate beginnings had come this abundance of love and purpose. Her hands, once trembling with fear and hunger, now moved confidently through days filled with meaningful work and tender moments. The cowboy who had offered her shelter had become the cornerstone of her world, and together they had built something neither could have created alone. It wasn't the life Zanna had imagined for herself when she'd set out from Tennessee, alone and afraid. It was better, richer, deeper, and more fulfilling than any dream she could have conjured. The road had been difficult at times, marked by challenges that had tested their courage and resolve. But standing in Elias's embrace, Zanna knew with absolute certainty that every step of that journey had been worthwhile, for in finding each other, they had both found home.